Hi there, Jared from Photo to Canvas here, and I am here today to show you everything you need to know about building your own canvas frames from stretcher bars. I've been doing this for a long time. I've made thousands of canvases and I've hit a lot of hurdles along the way, and I thought I would try to save people a bunch of time. I want to be really in depth and I want to try to answer all your questions. We're going to talk about the wood I use, what kind of wood it is, where I get it, the tools I use, and anything else you need to know. So here we are in my garage. My house is about 3 blocks from my shop. I do not like dust and all this fun stuff around my machines, so I keep it all at home and I cut everything to length, custom here, take it to my shop, which we will do in this video, nail it together and stretch canvases over it. I am not going to show you how to stretch a canvas. That will be another video. All right, now the main thing to know is if you try to buy stretcher bars online, the easiest way to find them is buying pre-cut lengths that basically snap together on the corners and you make your canvas. But with as many canvases as I make, and the fact that I do them all custom to size, I buy my stretcher bars in 10-foot sticks. Now I have a few different printers, I have a bunch of different canvases, and canvases tend to shrink when you print them. Different amounts on different canvases, and my print software has extensions and ways to scale it to try to fix that, but it's not super accurate. So while I used to pre-cut everything, because I used one printer and only one kind of canvas, I would pre-cut everything. I had stacks of bars at my shop of different lengths, so if somebody orders something, I had the parts there to throw it together, but I no longer do that. Now, I print them one day, I measure them, I varnish them if they are archival. The next morning before work, I cut the bars, take them to work, assemble them, there you go. Okay, the first thing we're gonna talk about is my stretcher bars and where I get them, because this was the hardest step for me to figure out. Now, I bought my shop about 5 years ago from another guy who used a company called Linen Liners out of LA, who custom milled his stretcher bars. They are made of finger jointed pine, which means they are kiln dried, very dry pieces of pine that have finger joints, gluing them together so you can make long sticks. This allows them to be made without any knots and relatively straight. Now, I bought this shop right after COVID started, and lumber prices, if you remember, went completely bananas. Now, prices at Linen Liners were really high, and at the same time, I was buying all my canvas from Breathing Color out of Austin, Texas. And they sell stretcher bars. So I started looking at theirs because I was already doing a bunch of business with them and getting good pricing. Now, the toughest thing about buying 10-foot sticks of stretcher bars is shipping. You have to pay for freight, which means it's going on a pallet, on a train, and that means it's expensive. Now, one of the cool things with Breathing Color is they were willing to work with me because I was on a very tight budget. My shop was really small and lumber was really expensive. So they were willing to do things like set up the freight so it just stayed at will call. And instead of having to pay a huge fee for a big truck to come down a residential street because I was working out of my house and deliver the stuff, they would leave it at will call. I would borrow a truck. I would drive across town a few times a year, throw it in the truck, bring it home. Now, this is where my first issue with Breathing Color's stretcher bars started. By the time they made it from Austin to Portland, Oregon, they were in shambles. Like, they just used shrink wrap to make small bundles, and half the shrink wrap was broken. The stretcher bars were everywhere. It was a big mess. It was kind of a pain in the butt. So I had to restack everything to put it in my garage. But I made it work because it saved me a few $100 on the freight. I mean, the freight could be like $700 or $800 for an order, just for shipping. And then, because of COVID, we started having lumber shortages. Now, when this happened, shops all across the country were having a very hard time stocking the stretcher bars. Everybody was pretty much using the same 1.5-inch bar. Not identical, but it was milled very, very similar. And everybody was out of them. So one of the things I did was I called shops all over the country. I found a guy on the East Coast, and he didn't have any, but one of the mills he worked for was in Southern Oregon. And he got me in touch with them, so I contacted them. They talked to me about making custom bars just for me. Now, this is something that I had talked to several mills within Portland about, but with the quantities I needed, it was just too expensive. But these guys were willing to do a pretty small order for a really good price. However, they didn't have finger jointed pine. They had, I believe, alder. This is a piece that I have left over. It's got some knots in it. Not very often, but I had to cut all of them out. That cost me a lot of lumber. They were willing to bring it to Portland for free, which was part of the reason I went with it. And the profile was great. They custom made it for me, but the stacking was a mess. The lengths were a mess. The bottom line is the bars were like boomerangs. They were all over the place. I had to basically chop most of it into like 8 to 10 inch sticks, which with what I do was a huge bummer and took me a really long time to go through that lumber. So I started ordering some more from Breathing Color when they got it back in stock. But I was having some issues with my lumber from Breathing Color too. Now I use 1.5" stretcher bars and 3/4 stretcher bars. 1.5" was fine. The 3/4 I was getting from Breathing Color, I was not super stoked with. Now they have two kinds. They have their economy 3/4 bars, which are these, and they're basically worthless. They're like, they're great for tiny little canvases, but every corner on them is super, super sharp. So they're just not good because I had to break all the corners. They're super wavy. They're economy. They're very, very cheap. I would not bother ordering them ever again. So the bar that I got a lot of was their 5/8 bar. So while I was editing this video, I remembered that these 5/8 bars actually were not from Breathing Color. They were from a place called Framers Inventory, which is a local framing shop supply center. I started working with them because I wanted to keep as much of my business local as I could. Their 1.5" bars were great. They're milled out in Madras, where a buddy of mine lives, not too far from Portland, so I loved that aspect. But they're really expensive, and you have to spend a certain amount of money every year to have an account with these guys, and that was a challenge for me. And even though I didn't have to pay freight, the bars were still so much more expensive that it was costing me more than having them shipped. Plus, these 5/8 bars kind of sucked, so we're gonna get back to that, but these ones were not from Breathing Color. Apologies. Thinner than the 3/4, it has a rounded edge, it's deeper, but the back corner is sharp. Very sharp. So I had to soften that corner on all my stock with my chamfer plane at my shop that you'll see later in the video. But this stuff wasn't super straight either. Like I had a lot of problems. I would have to go through like 4 or 5 sticks to find one straight enough to get a 2-foot long chunk. And because it's thinner than 3/4, it makes it even tougher for the cross bracing. So I'm not super stoked with this bar either, and I really just got fed up with dealing with the freight. That's not on Breathing Color. They were super helpful in trying to get me through that, but it was just a huge pain. But as my business grew and I no longer had access to a truck, I decided I didn't want to deal with going and getting it from will call anymore. So what did I do? I called Thad back at Linen Liners. Now, Linen Liners is not somewhere you would find on Google looking for stretcher bars for some reason. Their bars are excellent. They have a huge selection. They're very well made, and they're packaged in really nice boxes. So they ship fantastic. They stay straight. They're all bundled together, and they're just great quality. And their pricing has gotten a lot better. I can totally justify the freight. It's not as much because it's coming from Southern California to Oregon versus all the way from Austin. But what really gets me is my contact there, who's Thad, who I believe is the owner, reminds me of myself. When I call, I get an answer. When I email, I get a response like from him or the like secretary ordering person or whatever, like same day. Breathing Color would take me days sometimes. And it's nothing on them, but it felt like a very personal relationship. I had one freight shipment that was taking a while, and Thad chopped some up, put them in a box, and UPS'd them to me the next day. Like, they're super helpful. Their bars are the best. And now that my shop is doing better, I am willing to pay the price for that kind of service. I don't see any reason why I will ever buy stretcher bars from anywhere else. So I'm going to put a link to them in the description below. If you need to buy stretcher bars and you're looking at buying full length sticks, they're the place to go. You save money if you buy several boxes, and you don't want to buy more than 5 boxes at a time because that messes with the freight from what he told me. So 5 boxes is the perfect number. I do that a few times a year and I'm good to go. The bars I get from them, this is their 1.5" bar. Now, 8 out of 10 sticks are almost perfectly straight. They're fantastic. Now, their 3/4 bars are an actual 3/4, but they still have that sharp back corner. So I do plan on reaching out to him to talk to them about breaking that corner. But because I do not use these bars a ton, and I'm happy with my chamfer plane setup that I use at my shop, it's not a huge concern right now, but I am gonna see if I can get him to break those corners for me on the machine. They just change it on their knife setup, and it would do that to all their molding that goes through their router system. So there you go. Linen liners is the place to go when you need stretcher bars. They also have a ton of variety, so you should be able to find anything you need there. That's pretty much all there is to my molding. Linen liners, finger jointed pine. I store it in my garage. I cut it to length for every canvas, take it to the shop, put it together, done. There is one more piece of wood involved in making canvas frames, and that is your bracing bars. Now, the guy, when I bought this shop, used to use linen liners bracing bars. It's about a 1/2 inch thick, finger jointed pine. It's not cheap, and I got really irritated paying that much money for a piece of wood that you never are going to see. So this is what I did, and one of the best tips from this video. This is furring strips that I buy down the street from Lowe's. It's super cheap. It's 1x2. It did get pretty expensive during COVID, but it's back down. It's like $1.50 for an 8-foot stick, which is way cheaper than what Linen Liners was selling me. Does have some knots. Some of them are wonky, but overall they're actually pretty straight, and they're super cheap, and I can buy them locally, so I don't have to buy a ton at a time. There's a Lowe's like a mile from my house, and it works perfect. I don't know if they have them at Home Depot. I don't care. I don't like Home Depot. Now, I use these in my frames. For the corners, I cut about 6-inch long pieces for my corner bracing, and then any length that's 36 inches or more gets a center brace. So this is a really, really great deal. They work awesome. Highly recommend. I'll put a link in the description below to these as well, so you can make sure you're getting the right thing. Now, if I'm using these for the 3/4 bars, it has to be ripped down because the measurement, sorry, trying to get it to focus. Because this face is only about 5/8. So you can get some of this, run it through the table saw. There you go. That's it. That's all the wood. Let's do tools. All right, sorry about the poor lighting. I'm not spending a lot of time on it because this is a technical video and it's a garage. My main tool. This is my DeWalt DW S15. Now, I've been a carpenter for 20-something years. DeWalt's always made my favorite miter saws. I had the big fancy 12-inch sliding compound miter. Way too big for my space. I don't need that anymore, so I sold that. It was one of the old Better Made ones too. But I bought this guy. It's a 12-inch blade. A 10-inch blade would be fine, but because I'm a carpenter and I do stuff outside of this world, I wanted the bigger blade because I do not want the slide. The slide makes your chop saw take up like twice as much space, as well as whether or not it miters both directions. So this only 45s one way, which I basically never have to do. When I cut my 45s, I slide it back and forth this way. Works fantastic. Sorry if the sound is awful. My furnace just turned on. I'm sure you can still hear me. This thing's been great. It was cheap. It was like 300 bucks or something. I've had it for several years. No issues whatsoever. I got the box it came in, and I built this little dust catcher. It's not amazing, but the dust collection on miter saws just sucks, period. But this has caught quite a bit of dust. And attached to this, I have the 2-inch vac going to my rigid shop vac. It's not actually going directly to my shop vac though, because I have it hooked up to one of these cool dust bucket things that go in line between your tool and your vacuum. They capture the majority of the dust before it gets to your shop vac. I've been running my rigid shop vac for a couple years, and I've never had to empty it. I've never had to change the filter. I'll occasionally shake the filter out because some dust does get through, but all the dust gets collected in this 5-gallon bucket, and it's super easy to dump out. From Amazon, I got this little quick release hose thing, so it just clips onto the back. because I need to pop it off every now and then, and I'll show you why momentarily. But this is a great tool. It's set up on this chop saw bench that is from when I worked in the film industry. This is how we make them. It uses what's called hog troughs everywhere, very common thing in film. This guy right here, a couple 1x3s nailed together, kind of like a hog trough. So I have these set up for rails for my stops along it. And then this is the one that I clamp to the rails so I can do repeat cuts over and over and over. And on top of that, I made this handy little tape measure that I need to make a new one because this one's like 5 years old and super beaten up, that are marks so I can cut standard length bars without having to measure them. And it saves me so much time. So pine hog troughs, get yourself a nice bench for your saw. And if you use a stop block like this with vice grip clamps and this tape measure system, you're gonna save a ton of time. So that's how I cut everything to length. All right, now what I'm gonna show you now is one of my favorite tools as a carpenter. It took me many, many years to actually start using this technology, and I wish I used it a long time previous. I have known about it, but I never owned one. So when you're putting your center bracing in, you're basically attaching boards like this. There's not a really good way to do that, or at least I didn't think there was. When I bought my shop, the guy just used a 18 gauge brad nail and just put little toenails in there. Wasn't super strong. Occasionally one would go wild, bust out the other side. I have many holes in my fingers from decades of doing carpentry and little brad nails popping through woods, following the grain, popping out. And I've had them shoot right through my finger, through my fingernail. It's not fun, but it's also just not a super solid joint. So what I adapted to my system are pocket holes. If you've ever heard of Kreg jigs, they are very, very popular in cabinetry. And Kreg, K-R-E-G, is a brand. I don't know if they invented it or what, but they're kind of the big company when it comes to pocket holes. In cabinetry, it's used when you're trying to attach a thin sheet of plywood and you want to put a screw like through like that and attach it. But pre-drilling at an angle like that can be a total pain in the ass. So they came up with this jig system, and it always looked really complicated, and they're plastic and they make all sorts of parts for it, and they just kind of seem crappy. And the couple times I tried to use them, I just got frustrated because I didn't spend the actual time to learn about it. So I just kind of blew it off. But what I decided was that using a pocket hole and going down like that through my bracer bar into my stretcher bar would be the strongest way to attach these. And the pocket hole jigs basically attach to this piece of wood, and they have a jig that allows your drill to pre-drill at a really steep angle with this big old monster drill bit. Now I looked around on Amazon and online, and I really didn't like the Kreg jig systems that I found. I wanted something that I could mount on my bench next to my chop saw, and I didn't want something that was plastic and incredibly overpriced. I found this, Hole Wood. Hole Wood. I don't know how you pronounce that. I'll put a link in the description below. I bought this on Amazon. It mounts right here to my bench beside my saw. It is made of metal, all metal, much cheaper than the Kreg jig system. I'm sure it's Chinese, maybe Kreg jig's made in the USA, I don't know. It's fantastic. On top of that, for an extra like $5, I got one that has this vacuum port on the front. Now this is the same size as my chop saw. So remember I told you I had that quick release? When I'm done chopping my bars and I'm ready to start cutting these, I pop the hose right off and it plugs into there. Now the way that this thing works, you put your board in, you clamp it down, you get your drill, now you got a pocket hole. It's awesome. So it makes way less dust. I'm in a garage, I make a lot of dust, but I like it to be as little as possible. And this is a super solid system, super affordable, and the vacuum thing is just fantastic. The one annoying thing is I can't cut anything bigger than a 2x6 on this saw because this is in the way. But if I needed to do that, I could remount it, whatever, it'd be fine. But this is absolutely awesome. It was a total game changer. It makes me really proud of, with my canvases, of the structural durability of them, with your center bars and your frames. Now, I think you can actually set this to work with the 1/2-inch bars, the narrower ones, but I just haven't needed to. I very rarely make big canvases with the thinner bars, so it just hasn't been a necessity. And that allows me to just keep this locked in as it is. Occasionally my furring strips are a little bit different thicknesses, but you just crank on the thing that clamps it together. You just crank on it a couple turns with your fingers, either direction, and it works perfect. So I really, really recommend this pocket hole system. If you're gonna buy one, don't buy the Kreg. It's too expensive and they're plastic, and this works just as good. So I think that's pretty much it for my garage. Everybody out there isn't going to have the need to buy sticks of molding, but if you're a painter and you wanna paint different sizes, this stuff is so much cheaper than buying the pre-made Blick ones or whatever like that. But more so if you're a shop doing what I do, you will go broke very quickly if you buy the pre-cut stretcher bars. So check out linen liners, check out these pine bars. These are the tools to get. Now we are going to get some cut stretcher bars. We're gonna go back to my shop and I'm gonna show you how I put everything together. All right, we're in the shop and we're gonna go over some assembly. So the first thing I'm assembling is some of the narrower bars. I'm doing some 16 by 20 frames. And what I'm going to start by explaining are the tools that I use. So this is one of my guns. This is my other gun. These are V Nailers. Now, lots of frame shops have big presses. You know, they're giant things that use pneumatics and a foot pedal to put your metal fasteners in the corner of your 45s. Now those machines are really expensive. I'm a carpenter, I'm used to nail guns. So I found these V Nailers and they shoot L-shaped framing nails into your lumber. This is what they look like. Now I use two lengths. I use 1/2-inch because that's as long as they make them. And I use 1/4-inch for my 3/4 bars. This is the Meite gun. This is the first one I bought. It's kind of a generic name, like Chinese nail gun company. If you look them up on Amazon, the same gun comes with several different names on it. This one is great, but it's kind of a pain in the butt to change the nails. You have to take this out completely, and you have to slide this other thing out and up to change the length. So I thought this was broken at one point. It was not, but I bought a second gun in case it was. And if this thing goes down, I'm kind of dead in the water, so I needed to make sure I had a backup anyways. This is the Kamsin gun. It has this handy little slider on it that adjusts for your nail length, so you don't have to pull that thing out. So what I do is I have one gun loaded with each length nail. So if I'm doing 3/4 bars, I use this gun. If I'm using 1.5 inch, I use this gun. Now I like to nail on both sides. For the 3/4, that's the profile, I put it down on its back and I put 2 nails in this corner. Then I flip it over and I put 1 in the back. Now you have to start with the flat side down because if you're this way and you're trying to nail it, it's gonna tilt and it won't be square. So you start this way, you put 2 in each of the 4 corners, then I flip it and put 1 in the back, and I end up with this. This is the top, 2, 1 on the back. Now with the 1.5 inch bars, I like 1 on top and 2 on the bottom. Because of the way the molding is, there's more space for 2 on the bottom. 1, 2. So I start with it on its flat edge. I put 1 in the corner, each corner go all the way around, flip it over. That 1 keeps it from spreading when I put 2 on the other side. These ones, I think it's really important to put them on both sides because they're only a 1/2 inch long. These are 1.5 inches or about 1.25 inches deep. So you really want that extra beef of attachment. I don't use glue. In all my years of building, I know that gluing the end grain in a 45 isn't gonna add much. It might add a little bit, but the canvas, everything is holding it together. There's nothing really pushing it apart anyways. Now the V-nails that I like to use are these frame pack V-nails. You need to make sure if you're using these guns that you use the universal style. They have two styles, the AMP and the universal. The AMP are sized a little bit differently. I'm pretty sure those are for the big presses. So after having some struggles and talking to the company, they assured me that universal are the ones to use. I will link these in the description below. Okay, so one thing I want to add is sharp corners. I mentioned the sharp corners when I was in my garage. Aside from contacting linen lighters to see if they can mill a softer corner onto here, which I don't really feel like doing right now, it's not that big a deal for me, I went on Amazon and bought one of these. It's called a Chamfer Plane. Basically, it just softens the corner like a router would without needing electricity and without making a massive mess. Now, normally a router would be the right tool to add a soft corner to your molding. I don't really like stretching canvases over these hard corners. It just increases the chance of the ink cracking, so it seems kind of silly. I'm not really sure why every corner that gets milled doesn't have a soft rounded edge. But this chamfer plane makes it really easy. It's got a curved blade. So on my 1.5 bars, all the corners that I need to be broken are broken. Broken meaning rounded. 3/4 bars, this one outside corner is really sharp. So all you do is you lay it down, get your chamfer plane, run it up one side, back to here. You might not be able to tell, but now that's slightly curved. So this is an awesome tool because the molding, that if you don't get it from linen lighters or if you get this stock, might have a hard edge, and you can use this to break it. I'll put a link in the description below for the chamfer plane. Okay, so now we're going to talk about bracing. This is a 24 by 30. Now when I'm nailing it, I hold this in the corner when I'm nailing it on the back, just to make sure I start with a square piece. If you want to see how square it is, an easy trick is you measure corner to corner, corner to corner, and those numbers need to be the same. That means your frame is square. Now, my bracing guide. 1.5 deep bars require more bracing because they are not as wide this way. The 3/4 bars are wider this way and much more sturdier. So any canvas, 1.5 bars, 16 by 24 or above gets corner bracing. Now the corner bracing I showed you in the garage is going to be these furring strips cut to about 6-inch lengths with a 45 on each end. I don't like the long corner bracing because if they're not in the perfect place, they can push the middle of your frames out. I like just little short bracing. It doesn't need to be long. There's no real point to that, except it can help this distance, which I do center bracing for. Center bracing, I only put in any length 36 inches or above with 1.5 bars. And for center bracing, we're using that same furring strip with the Hole Jig holes that I showed you in the garage. So if I have a canvas that's over 72 inches, 6 feet, I'm gonna put 2 braces and then another one going the other way. And I use these pocket holes for all the connections. Now for the 3/4 bars, you don't need as much bracing. I only basically put set corner braces if it's like a 20 by 30 or above, and I only put center bracing if it's 36 or above, but it's not gonna do as much because you can't use those pocket holes very well. So I use 18 gauge brad nails and I just toenail them into the corner of each brace. Now for my corner braces, I use 1/4 inch narrow crown staples, 1.25 inches long. Hold this in the corner, put the staple in. After you get 2 corners, check your square, because if you put these in and you're putting too much pressure on it, it can force your frame out of square. So you want to put a couple in, check your square, put a couple more in, put the other 2 in, check your square again, and if it's out of square, you can usually put some pressure on it and straighten it out. Now, one other thing to note is when I put these corner braces in, I don't like them flush with the back. And that's because the tool that I use when I'm stretching my canvas, I like to have that edge free in the corner so I can get the canvas nice and snug. If this was on the back flush, my tool would have nowhere to pry. And that's another problem with using the 3/4 bars, is they have to be flush, so it makes stretching that last bit hard to get it really tight, because I like the tool. Okay, so this frame is a 30 by 40, so it's gonna have a center brace on the 40-inch length. Okay, now when I attach this, this is the back of the frame. I want my pocket holes on the outside, because if this ever needs to be removed, like if your canvas gets loose, you can make one of these that's a little bit longer and wedge it in there and it'll tighten things up. I wanna be able to unscrew this. If you put it the other way, your canvas is covering the holes and you can't get the screws out. I also like to set it away from the back edge a little bit so I can use my canvas stretching pliers. Now the pocket hole screws are a special screw. I believe mine are 1.25 inches long. I'll put a link to those in the description. And then the pocket hole kit comes with this really long square drive for your screw gun. My screw gun has a torque adjustment on it. And that's really good because you want very little torque when you attach these screws. There's not a lot of meat there and the screw isn't very long, so it's really easy to overscrew it and strip it out. You can do this laying up, standing down, however you want to do it. I'm gonna put this right here on my line, get my gun, screw that down. See, this is the adjustable torque I was talking about, and I have it on the automatic setting. Now it's helpful in case there's any bows in here to put this down, and then you can really put some weight on it. I'm gonna get the screw in here. All right, our center brace is in. So now our frame is basically ready. There's one more thing I like to do to all my frames though. This is a sanding block. It's a, it's probably like 160 grit. It's a belt sander belt wrapped around a piece of plywood that I made. I chamfered the corners and it fits on here a little bit loose. I like to get it and just soften up these corners because again, printed canvas does not like hard right corners. When you yank on it and stretch it, it's easy for that ink to crack. So anywhere I have a hard right corner, I like it to be softened a little bit. That's all there is to it. Now I'm gonna do another in-depth video about how I actually stretch the canvases, but this one is just about the frames. Feel free to email me, ask questions below. It's impossible for me to remember to cover everything, but I really hope that my 5 years of figuring this out on my own, I hope you can save some of that time and avoid some of the mistakes I've made. And I hope this works out for you making a whole bunch of canvas frames. If this was helpful, please subscribe to the channel. Please like the video, and I'll see you next time.